The Frostborns Dues. Eowyn Aldrich had never felt the cold, though winter had always followed her. But when the first storm arrived in midsummer and the lake froze solid overnight, she knew something had awakened. The trees groaned under the weight of ice. The air stilled. And then he stood at the edge of the storm, silver-eyed and watching. "The frost remembers you," he murmured, "and it has finally come to reclaim you." Chapter 1. The Unseasonal Frost. The hydrangeas, plump and boasting their summer blues just yesterday, were encased in a delicate, cruel filigree of ice. Eowyn Aldrich traced the crystalline patterns on the window pane, her breath fogging the glass. 62 years she'd lived, and never had she witnessed a frost like this, not in the heart of July. The village of Oakhaven, nestled in the foothills of the ancient Wispawood Mountains, was known for its mild summers, a haven from the swelter that gripped the rest of the country. This was unnatural. Eowyn pulled her worn woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders, a futile gesture against the chill that seemed to seep from the very bones of the earth. Her joints ached, a familiar complaint, but today the pain was sharper, a premonition humming beneath her skin. She'd always felt a strange kinship with winter, a melancholic beauty that resonated deep within her soul. But this wasn't the gentle embrace of winter, this was a hostile takeover, a frigid grip tightening around Oakhaven. The radio, perched on the kitchen counter, crackled with static, the local weatherman's voice lost in a blizzard of white noise. He'd been babbling about a freak weather anomaly, a polar vortex behaving erratically. Eowyn snorted softly. Polar vortex. More like a polar curse. She had a deeper, more unsettling explanation brewing in her gut, a feeling she couldn't shake, tied to whispers from her grandmother, long dead, about the Frostborn, beings of ice and legend. She glanced at the framed photograph on the mantelpiece, a faded image of her late husband, Thomas. His smile, usually a source of comfort, felt like a distant echo in the face of this encroaching cold. "What do you make of this, Tom?" she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. He'd been a man of science, a grounded soul. He would have scoffed at her superstitious leanings, offered a perfectly logical explanation. But Thomas was gone, taken by a swift, merciless illness 3 years prior, leaving a void in her life that even the warmest summer day couldn't fill. The silence of the house pressed in on her, heavy and expectant. The rhythmic tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hallway, usually a soothing presence, sounded ominous, each tick a countdown to something unknown. She moved to the kitchen, the scent of rosemary and thyme from her herb garden, usually so vibrant, now dulled, muted by the pervasive chill. Even the sturdy oak table, a family heirloom, felt cold to the touch. Eowyn poured herself a cup of chamomile tea, her hands trembling slightly. The steam curled upwards, a fleeting warmth against the icy air. As she sipped the tea, she gazed out the kitchen window, her eyes drawn to the lake that bordered her property. Oakhaven Lake, usually a shimmering expanse of sapphire blue, was now a solid sheet of white, frozen solid overnight. In July, a shiver ran down her spine. Not entirely from the cold. She'd seen something out there earlier, a fleeting glimpse of movement at the edge of the woods, a figure shrouded in the swirling snow. It had disappeared so quickly, she'd almost dismissed it as a trick of the light, a figment of her overactive imagination. But the image lingered, a haunting silhouette against the white landscape. Tall, imposing, and undeniably other. The feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't a menacing presence, not exactly, but it was undeniably there, a silent observer in the frozen landscape. Eowyn wrapped her hands tighter around the warm mug, trying to dispel the growing unease. She was being foolish, letting her grief and the strange weather get the better of her. She was alone, an old woman living on the edge of a frozen lake, her mind conjuring shadows in the unnatural twilight. But as the day wore on, the frost deepened, and the silence grew more profound. The wind howled, a mournful cry that echoed the growing dread in her heart. The trees, once verdant and full of life, were now skeletal figures, their branches encased in ice, groaning under the unnatural weight. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting. Waiting for what? Yoan didn't know, but the answer, she suspected, was hidden in the heart of the storm, in the frozen depths of the lake, and in the silver eyes she thought she'd imagined at the edge of the woods. As darkness began to creep in, painting the sky in shades of icy blue and deep violet, a single snowflake, larger than any she had ever seen, drifted down and landed on the window pane. It was intricate, beautiful, and terrifyingly perfect. And within its crystalline structure, Eowyn saw a reflection, not of herself, but of a pair of eyes, silver and piercing, staring back at her from the heart of the storm. Chapter 2. Silver Eyes in the Storm. The reflection vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving Eowyn breathless, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She pressed her hand against the cold glass, the lingering chill a stark reminder of the impossible image she'd just seen. It had to be a hallucination, a product of the strange light and her own mounting anxiety. Yet, the memory of those eyes, silver and impossibly ancient, burned in her mind. She forced herself to move, to break the spell of the frozen window. She needed to light the fire, to chase away the encroaching darkness and the bone-deep chill that threatened to consume her. The wood was damp, refusing to catch at first, mirroring the stubborn resistance she felt building within her. Finally, with a crackle and a hiss, the flames leaped to life, casting flickering shadows on the walls of the small living room. The fire offered a small measure of comfort, a fragile barrier against the unnatural cold. But the silence outside remained, a heavy, suffocating blanket smothering the usual sounds of Oakhaven.
No crickets chirped, no owls hooted, no dogs barked.
Even the wind seemed to have died down, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. Eowyn wrapped herself in a thick, hand-knitted blanket, a gift from Thomas, and settled into her worn armchair by the fire. She picked up her current book, a well-loved copy of Wuthering Heights, but the words blurred before her eyes. Her mind was elsewhere, trapped in the swirling snow and the memory of those silver eyes. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure Thomas's face, his reassuring smile, his calm, logical voice. She needed his grounding presence, his ability to explain away the inexplicable. But all she found was the aching emptiness of his absence, a void that seemed to grow wider with each passing day. A sudden scraping sound at the back door jolted her upright. Her heart leaped into her throat, a surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins. She strained her ears, listening intently. Silence. Had she imagined it? The wind playing tricks? Then it came again. A distinct, deliberate scrape, followed by a soft thud. Someone or something was at her door. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. She hadn't locked the door. In Oakhaven, they rarely locked their doors. It was a safe, close-knit community where everyone knew everyone else. But tonight, Oakhaven felt different, alien, transformed into a place of shadows and whispers. Slowly, cautiously, she rose from her chair, the blanket falling to the floor. She grabbed the heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace, her hand trembling slightly. It was a pathetic weapon, but it was all she had. She crept towards the back door, her footsteps muffled by the thick rug. The silence was broken only by the crackling of the fire and the frantic beating of her own heart. She reached the door and peered through the small, frosted window. At first, she saw nothing but darkness. Then, the swirling snow shifted, revealing a figure standing on her porch. Tall, cloaked in shadow, and undeniably him. The man from the edge of the woods. The man with the silver eyes. He stood there, motionless, seemingly unaffected by the biting cold. His face was partially obscured by the hood of his cloak, but she could see the glint of his eyes, piercing through the darkness like twin stars. They were even more striking up close, radiating an otherworldly intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. He didn't move, didn't speak. He simply watched her. Eowyn's hand tightened around the poker. Fear warred with a strange, inexplicable pull, a sense of recognition that resonated deep within her soul. It was as if she had been waiting for him, as if she had known, on some subconscious level, that he would come. He raised a hand, slowly, deliberately, and placed it against the frosted glass of the door. The ice beneath his fingertips didn't melt. Instead, it seemed to bloom, spreading outwards in intricate, crystalline patterns. "The frost remembers you," he murmured, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very air, "and it has finally come to reclaim you." The words were barely audible, yet they echoed in her mind, resonating with a power that defied the silence of the frozen night. The poker slipped from Eowyn's grasp, clattering loudly to the floor, but she barely registered the noise, captivated, lost in the mesmerizing intensity of his gaze. Chapter 3. Whispers of the Frostborn. The sound of the poker hitting the floor seemed to break the spell, at least momentarily. Eowyn blinked, the world snapping back into sharp, albeit still terrifying, focus. The man outside being, for she was increasingly certain he was something more, remained motionless, his hand still pressed against the glass, the frost flowers blooming around his fingertips. Who are you?" she managed, her voice a shaky whisper that barely reached her own ears, let alone his. The words felt inadequate, foolish even, in the face of this presence. He tilted his head slightly, a movement that was both graceful and unsettling. The shadows shifted, revealing more of his face. High cheekbones, a strong jawline dusted with a hint of silver stubble, a mouth that was both firm and surprisingly sensual. He was undeniably beautiful, in a wild, untamed way, but it was a beauty that held a hint of danger, a whisper of the icy wilderness he seemed to embody. "Names of power. Eowyn Aldrich," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to bypass her ears and settle directly in her bones. "And some names are best left unspoken until the time is right." The way he spoke her name, with such familiarity, such ownership, sent another shiver down her spine. How did he know her name? She had never seen him before in her life. Of that she was certain. Or was she? The nagging feeling of recognition persisted, a faint echo of something buried deep within her memory. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to inject some steel into her voice, to mask the tremor of fear that threatened to overwhelm her. He lowered his hand from the glass, the frost flowers slowly receding, as if retreating back into his very being. "I want what is mine," he said, his silver eyes locking onto hers, holding her captive in their intense gaze. "What has always been mine." His words were cryptic, unsettling, yet they resonated with a strange, primal truth. She felt a pull towards him, a magnetic force that defied logic and reason. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly incomprehensible. "I don't understand," she stammered, her mind reeling. He took a step closer to the door, his form filling the small window. He was even taller than she had initially thought, his presence overwhelming, radiating a power that seemed to crackle in the air around him. "You will," he said, his voice softening slightly, losing some of its icy edge. "In time, you will understand everything." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in her worn dressing gown, her tangled gray hair, her frightened, questioning eyes. He seemed to see beyond her outward appearance, to the very core of her being. "Your grandmother spoke of us, didn't she?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper now, yet it carried the weight of centuries. "Of the Frostborn? Of the ancient pacts? Of the blood that binds us to the winter?" Eowyn's breath caught in her throat. Her grandmother, Alara, had filled her childhood with stories, fantastical tales of beings who controlled the ice and snow, of a world hidden beneath the veil of the ordinary. She had dismissed them as folklore, as the ramblings of an old woman clinging to the remnants of a forgotten past. But now, standing face to face with this being, those stories took on a chilling new reality. She told me stories," Eowyn admitted, her voice trembling. "But I thought they were just stories." A faint smile, fleeting and enigmatic, touched his lips. "Stories are often more than they seem, Eowyn Aldrich. They are the echoes of truth, carried on the wind, whispered through the generations." He reached out again, this time not touching the glass, but hovering his hand just inches from it. She could feel the cold radiating from him, a palpable wave that seeped through the wood and glass, chilling her to the bone. "Open the door, Yoan," he said, his voice a soft, seductive command. "Let me in." Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to run, to hide. But another part of her, a deeper, more primal part, urged her to obey. It was the part that recognized him, the part that felt the pull, the connection, the undeniable truth of his words. It was the part that whispered of a destiny she had long forgotten, a destiny that was now, quite literally, knocking at her door. Her hand, seemingly of its own accord, reached for the latch. Chapter 4. The Frozen Lake's Secret. Her fingers brushed the cold metal of the latch, a jolt of electricity, or perhaps it was pure, unadulterated fear shooting up her arm. Yoan hesitated, her mind a battlefield of conflicting impulses. Trust and terror, curiosity and caution, all vying for dominance. The rational part of her screamed at her to step away, to barricade the door, to call well. Who would she call? Sheriff Brody, a kindly man, but one who dealt in lost cats and speeding tickets, not whatever this was. The man outside the Frostborn, if her grandmother's stories were to be believed, remained perfectly still, his silver eyes unwavering, fixed on hers with an intensity that was both unnerving and strangely captivating. He didn't pressure her, didn't threaten her. He simply waited, radiating an aura of patient power, as if he knew that she would eventually succumb, not to force, but to the undeniable pull that existed between them. It was that patience, that unwavering certainty, that finally broke through her resistance. It was the antithesis of everything she expected from a creature of myth, a being of such power. It spoke of something deeper, something more complex than mere dominance. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Yoan unlatched the door. It swung inward with a soft creak, revealing him fully. He was even more imposing up close, the details of his appearance now starkly clear in the flickering light of the fire. His cloak, a deep, midnight blue, was trimmed with what looked like frost-touched fur. Beneath it, he wore clothing of a similar dark hue, simple yet elegant, crafted from materials she couldn't quite identify. It looked ancient, yet timeless. He stepped across the threshold, the cold intensifying with his presence, a tangible wave that washed over her. He didn't rush, didn't invade her space. He simply stood there, allowing her to adjust to his presence, to the sheer, overwhelming reality of him. "Thank you, Owen," he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to resonate with the crackling flames in the hearth. He closed the door behind him, shutting out the swirling snow and the unnatural stillness of the frozen night. The room, which had felt small and confining moments before, now seemed to shrink even further, dominated by his presence. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He turned to face her, his silver eyes studying her with an unnerving intensity. "Now," he said, his voice softening, "we begin to unravel the truth." He gestured towards the frozen lake, visible through the window. "The answers you seek lie beneath the ice, Yoan. In the heart of the lake, where the past sleeps, waiting to be awakened." The lake. It had always held a strange fascination for her, a sense of mystery that she had never been able to fully explain. As a child, she had spent countless hours exploring its shores, drawn to its shimmering depths. Even after Thomas's death, she had found solace in walking its perimeter, the quiet solitude a balm for her grieving soul. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice gaining a little strength. "What's in the lake?" He moved closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the subtle chill radiating from his body. It wasn't unpleasant, not exactly. It was more like a reminder, a constant hum of the power he possessed. "A secret," he said, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "A secret that has been kept for centuries. A secret that binds you and me, Yoan. A secret that the frost remembers, even if you do not." He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers surprisingly warm against her skin, despite the icy aura that surrounded him. The touch was fleeting, barely a brush of skin against skin, yet it sent a jolt through her, a wave of warmth that spread through her veins, chasing away the lingering chill. "Tonight," he said, his eyes locking onto hers, "the lake will reveal its truth. And you, Eowyn Aldrich, will finally understand your destiny." He paused and added with a low intensity, "Our destiny." His gaze lingered, a promise and a threat interwoven in the silvery depths of his eyes. Chapter 5. Echoes of a Forgotten Past. His words hung in the air, heavy with implication, resonating with the crackling fire and the silent pressure of his presence. Our destiny. The phrase echoed in Eowyn's mind, a bewildering mix of fear and something else. Something akin to anticipation, a flicker of excitement she hadn't felt in years. Not since Thomas. She pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the immediate, the unsettling reality of the Frostborns standing in her living room. "I don't understand," she repeated, her voice firmer this time, fueled by a rising tide of defiance. "What destiny? I'm just an old woman. I live a quiet life. There's nothing special about me." He smiled then, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes, transforming his face from something intimidating to something almost approachable. "Almost. You are far more than you believe, Eowyn," he said, his voice soft, yet laced with an undeniable conviction. "You carry the blood of the Ancient Ones, the blood of those who made a pact with the winter long ago. You are a descendant of Elara, the winter's bride." Elara. The name struck a chord, a deep, resonant note within her soul. Her grandmother's name, yes, but also more. It was a name whispered in hushed tones in Elara's stories, a name associated with power, with magic, with a love that defied the boundaries of the mortal world. "The winter's bride?" Eowyn questioned, her brow furrowed in confusion. "But that's just a legend. A story my grandmother used to tell." "Legends often hold grains of truth, Eowyn," he countered, his eyes never leaving hers. "And the legend of Elara is more than just a grain. It is the bedrock of your existence, the key to understanding who you are and why I am here." He moved towards a window, gazing out at the frozen lake. The moonlight, filtering through the clouds, illuminated the icy surface, creating an ethereal, almost otherworldly glow. "Elara was a powerful woman," he continued, his voice taking on a faraway quality, as if he were speaking from a memory, not a story. "She could command the snow and ice. She could speak to the wind. She could heal the sick with a touch. She was chosen by the Frostborn, by my ancestor, to be his bride, to seal a pact between our people and yours." "A pact?" Eowyn asked, her mind struggling to reconcile the fantastical tales with the reality of her mundane life. "A pact to balance," he explained. "A pact to ensure the harmony between the human world and the realm of the Frostborn. A pact that was broken centuries ago by your ancestors." He turned back to face her, his expression grave. "The breaking of that pact brought a curse upon your bloodline, Eowyn. A curse of sorrow, of loneliness, of a life touched by the chill of winter, even in the warmth of summer. A curse that only you can break." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. The loneliness, the sorrow, the strange affinity for winter, it all suddenly made a terrifying kind of sense. She had always felt like an outsider, like someone who didn't quite belong, even in her own skin. She had attributed it to her introspective nature, to the loss of Thomas, to the simple realities of aging. "But now how?" she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "How can I break a curse that's centuries old?" He stepped closer, his presence filling her vision, his silver eyes burning with an intensity that both frightened and fascinated her. "By embracing your heritage," he said, his voice low and compelling. "By accepting your power. By fulfilling the pact that your ancestors broke. By becoming mine." His hand reached out, not touching her, but hovering close enough that she could feel the subtle shift in the air, the tingling energy that emanated from him. The moonlight caught a silver ring on his finger, a single, intricately carved band depicting a wolf howling at a crescent moon. It was an image that stirred something deep within her, a faint echo of a forgotten memory, a whisper of a dream she couldn't quite grasp. He tilted his head, a subtle challenge in his gaze, daring her to reach for the unspoken understanding that shimmered between them, just beyond her grasp. Chapter 6. The Mark of the Winter Wolf.
The ring.
It wasn't just the moonlight catching on the silver it seemed to glow, a faint, ethereal luminescence that pulsed with a rhythm mirroring the frantic beat of Eowyn's heart. The wolf, the moon images from her grandmother's stories, images she dismissed as fanciful, now stared back at her, imbued with a chilling reality. "Becoming yours?" she repeated, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. The implication was clear, yet her mind rebelled against it. Marriage? To him? To a being of ice and legend? It was absurd, impossible, and yet he didn't answer directly, instead letting his gaze linger on the ring, then back to her face, letting the unspoken answer hang heavy in the air between them. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the crackling fire and the distant, mournful howl of something. It couldn't be a wolf, not this close to the village, not in this unnatural winter. But the sound sent a shiver down Eowyn's spine, a primal fear that resonated with the ancient stories swirling in her mind. He finally broke the silence, his voice low and laced with a hint of something she couldn't quite decipher. Was it regret? Longing? The pact was sealed with a marriage, he said, his voice a rough whisper. A union between the Frostborn and the chosen one of your bloodline. Alara was the first. You, Eowyn, are the last. The last? She questioned, her voice trembling. What would happen if I refuse? He didn't flinch, didn't threaten. He simply looked at her, his silver eyes filled with a profound sadness that pierced her to the core. The curse will continue, he said quietly. The frost will deepen. The balance will remain broken. And your line will end. Not just your life, Eowyn, but the legacy of Alara, the potential for healing, the hope for a future. It will all vanish. His words were a heavy weight, settling on her shoulders with the crushing force of the unnatural snow outside. It wasn't just her life at stake. It was something far greater, something that reached back centuries and stretched forward into an uncertain future. But I'm old, she protested, her voice laced with a desperate plea. I'm past childbearing years. How can I fulfill a pact that requires? He interrupted her, his voice gentle but firm. The pact is not about children, Eowyn. It is about connection, about binding your power to mine, about restoring the balance that was lost. Age is irrelevant. The magic is not. He reached out and, this time, he did touch her. He took her left hand in his fingers surprisingly warm against her chilled skin. He turned her hand over, examining her palm, his touch sending a strange, unfamiliar warmth coursing through her veins. The mark is faint, he murmured, his thumb tracing a barely visible line on her palm, a crescent-shaped scar she'd always dismissed as a childhood injury. But it is there. The mark of the winter wolf. The proof of your lineage, the sign of your destiny. As he spoke, the scar seemed to tingle, to warm, to glow, mirroring the faint luminescence of the ring on his finger. Eowyn stared at her palm, mesmerized, as the faint, almost invisible mark pulsed with a soft, silvery light. It was undeniable proof of everything he had said, of the fantastical stories that were now her reality. He released her hand, but the warmth lingered, a tangible reminder of the connection between them, of the power that flowed within her, dormant but now stirring. He stepped back, giving her space, allowing her to process the overwhelming truth that had been revealed. The choice, he seemed to be saying, was hers. But the weight of that choice, the implications for her lineage, for the world itself, pressed down on her with the force of 1,000 winters. He watched her, patient and unwavering, a silent promise and an unspoken question burning in the depths of his silver eyes. Chapter 7. A Dance of Shadows and Ice. The weight of his gaze, the unspoken question, the sheer presence of him filled the small cottage, pressing in on Eowyn, making it difficult to breathe, to think. She looked from his face, down to her hand, where the faint, silvery mark still pulsed with an unnatural light. It was a tangible link to a past she had never known, a past that was now demanding her attention, demanding her everything. "I need time," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. This is all too much. Too sudden." He inclined his head, a slight, almost regal gesture. "Time is a precious commodity," Wowen, he said, his voice low and resonant. "But I understand. The weight of centuries is not easily borne." He moved towards the fireplace, the flames reflecting in his silver eyes, making them seem to shimmer and dance. He stood there for a moment, seemingly lost in thought, his back to her, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the flickering light. "My name," he said, his voice barely audible above the crackling fire, "is Rorik, of the clan Frostborn." The name, like his presence, resonated with power, with a hint of danger, with the wild, untamed beauty of the frozen north. Rorik Frostborn. It sounded like something out of a legend, and yet, here he was, standing in her living room, a living, breathing embodiment of a story she had dismissed as fantasy. He turned back to face her, his expression softening slightly. "I will not force you, Wowen," he said, "but I urge you to consider carefully. The fate of more than just yourself hangs in the balance." He gestured towards the window, towards the frozen lake, shimmering under the moonlight. "The lake calls to you, Wowen. It holds the answers you seek. It holds the key to your past and to our future." He paused, his gaze intense, unwavering. "Walk with me. Let me show you." It was an invitation, not a command, a request, not a demand. And yet, it held the weight of 1,000 unspoken promises, 1,000 unspoken threats. Wowen hesitated. Fear, cold and sharp, still gnawed at her. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. Curiosity. A yearning for something more than the quiet, lonely existence she had been living. A desire to understand the strange pull she felt towards this being, towards this frozen world he represented. She looked at her hand again, at the mark of the winter wolf, now glowing faintly in the dim light. It was a symbol of her heritage, a sign of her destiny. Could she really turn her back on it? Could she really ignore the call of the lake, the whispers of her ancestors, the undeniable presence of Rorik Frostborn? She took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs, a stark reminder of the unnatural winter that gripped her world. She made her decision. "All right," she said, her voice trembling slightly, but firm. "I'll walk with you. Show me." A flicker of something relief? Satisfaction? Crossed Rorik's face, quickly masked by his usual stoic expression. He nodded, a single, curt nod. "Come," he said, his voice a low murmur. "The night is fleeting, and the lake awaits." He opened the door, the cold night air rushing in, swirling around them like a living entity. He offered her his arm, a gesture that was both courtly and possessive. She hesitated for a moment, then, steeling her resolve, she placed her hand on his arm. His skin was surprisingly warm, the contact sending a jolt of energy through her, a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. They stepped out into the frozen night, leaving the warmth of the cottage behind. The snow crunched beneath their feet, the only sound in the eerie silence. The moonlight illuminated their path, casting long, dancing shadows on the frozen landscape. They walked towards the lake, two figures silhouetted against the white expanse, embarking on a journey into the unknown, a dance of shadows and ice that would forever change their lives. The frozen surface reflected the moon back at them, a vast and watchful eye. Chapter 8. The Price of Warmth. The walk to the lake was short, but it felt like an eternity. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of their boots on the frozen snow and the occasional creak of the ice-laden trees. Wowen kept her hand firmly on Rorik's arm, not just for support, but for the surprising warmth that emanated from him, a small comfort in the biting cold. She glanced at him sideways, studying his profile in the moonlight. He was an enigma, a being of contradictions. He radiated power, yet he treated her with a strange gentleness. He spoke of ancient pacts and curses, Yet he seemed vulnerable, in a way she couldn't quite define. The air grew colder as they approached the lake, the temperature dropping noticeably. Eowyn shivered, pulling her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders. Rorik, seemingly unaffected by the frigid air, stopped at the edge of the frozen lake, his gaze fixed on the shimmering expanse of ice. "Here," he said, his voice a low murmur that barely disturbed the stillness of the night.
"This is where it began.
And this is where it will end." The ice stretched out before them, a vast, white canvas reflecting the moonlight. It looked solid, impenetrable, but Eowyn knew, from a lifetime of living beside it, that the lake was deep, its depths concealing untold secrets. Rorik released her arm and knelt at the edge of the ice, placing his hand flat on the frozen surface. The ice beneath his hand didn't melt. Instead, it seemed to glow, a faint, blue light emanating from his palm, spreading outwards in intricate, crystalline patterns. "The lake is a gateway," he said, his voice taking on a mystical quality. "A portal to the memories of the past. A place where the veil between worlds is thin." He closed his eyes, his breathing deepening, his body becoming perfectly still. Eowyn watched him, mesmerized, as the blue light intensified, illuminating his face with an ethereal glow. He looked otherworldly, like a being from another realm, a creature of myth and legend come to life. After a few moments, he opened his eyes, his gaze locking onto hers. The blue light had faded, but the ice still held a faint, shimmering quality. "Look," he said, his voice a soft command. Eowyn hesitantly knelt beside him, placing her own hand on the ice. The cold was intense, shocking, but beneath the initial jolt, she felt a strange warmth, a tingling energy that seemed to flow from the ice into her hand, up her arm, spreading through her entire body. And then she saw it, not with her eyes, but with her mind. A vision, a memory, not her own, yet intimately familiar. She saw a woman, standing on the shore of the lake, her long, dark hair whipping in the wind. She was beautiful, powerful, her eyes glowing with an inner light. Alara. She saw a man, tall and imposing, his silver eyes shining with an otherworldly intensity. Rorik's ancestor, the Frostborn who had chosen Alara as his bride. She saw them making a pact, a promise, a union sealed with a kiss, with a silver ring, with the exchange of vows that echoed across the centuries. She saw the happiness, the love, the balance that existed between them, between their two worlds. And then she saw the betrayal, the broken promise, the curse unleashed, the sorrow, the loneliness, the endless winter that had followed. The vision faded, leaving Eowyn gasping for breath, her heart pounding, her mind reeling. The ice beneath her hand felt cold again, the tingling energy gone. I saw, she stammered, her voice trembling. "I saw Alara. I saw everything." Rorik nodded, his expression grave. "The lake remembers," he said. "It holds the memories of those who came before us. It shows us the truth." He stood up, pulling her gently to her feet. "The price of the broken pact," he continued, his voice laced with a deep sadness, "was warmth. The warmth of love, of connection, of belonging. The curse stole that warmth, leaving only the chill of winter." He looked at her, his silver eyes filled with a longing that mirrored her own. "Only by restoring the pact, Eowyn, can we reclaim that warmth. Only by embracing our destiny can we break the curse and find peace." He hesitated, then met her gaze. "Can you feel it, Eowyn? The growing cold? It isn't just the weather. It is the consequence of a broken vow." Chapter 9. Beneath the frozen moon. His words, spoken with such quiet intensity, resonated deep within her, confirming the unsettling truth she had been trying to deny. The unnatural cold, the pervasive loneliness, the sense of something missing. It wasn't just her imagination, it wasn't just the grief of losing Thomas. It was something deeper, something older, something tied to the ancient pact, to the curse that had haunted her bloodline for centuries. "I do feel it," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. The cold seeped not just into her bones, but into her very soul, a constant reminder of the broken balance, of the warmth that had been lost. Rorik nodded, his gaze softening. He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his touch sending a shiver down her spine, a strange mix of fear and something else. Something that felt dangerously close to desire. "The moon is full," he said, his voice a low murmur, his gaze shifting upwards to the sky. "The veil is thin. Tonight, we can cross the threshold. Tonight, we can face the past and perhaps change the future." Eowyn followed his gaze. The moon hung high above them, a perfect silver disk in the inky sky, casting an ethereal glow on the frozen landscape. It was a beautiful sight, yet it filled her with a sense of unease, a premonition of something momentous, something irreversible, about to happen. "Cross the threshold?" she questioned, her voice trembling slightly. What do you mean?" He turned back to face her, his silver eyes reflecting the moonlight, making them seem to shimmer and dance. "The lake is not just a body of water, Eowyn," he said. "It is a gateway, a portal to another realm. The realm of the Frostborn. The realm of the Frostborn." The words sent a chill down her spine, a mixture of fear and fascination. It was the stuff of legends, of fairy tales, of the stories her grandmother had told her, stories she had dismissed as fantasy. And yet, here she was, standing on the shore of a frozen lake, under a full moon, with a being who claimed to be from that very realm. "You want me to go there?" she asked, her voice barely audible. He nodded, his expression serious.
"Not just go there, Eowyn,
"But become a part of it. To understand your heritage, to embrace your power, to fulfill the pact." He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming, radiating a power that seemed to crackle in the air around him. "I will guide you," he said, his voice soft, yet laced with an undeniable authority. "I will protect you. I will show you the wonders and the dangers of my world." He offered her his hand, his palm open, an invitation, a challenge, a promise. "Trust me, Eowyn," he said, his silver eyes locking onto hers, holding her captive in their intense gaze. "Trust the pull you feel. Trust the blood that binds us. Trust me." The word trust hung in the air, heavy with implication. Could she trust him? Could she trust this being, this creature of ice and legend? Could she trust the strange, inexplicable pull she felt towards him, a pull that defied logic and reason? She looked at his outstretched hand, at the silver ring on his finger, the wolf howling at the crescent moon. It was a symbol of the pact, of the destiny that awaited her, of the choice she had to make. She looked at the lake, at the frozen surface shimmering under the moonlight. It was a gateway to another world, a world of magic, of danger, of the unknown. She looked at Rorik, at his silver eyes, filled with a mixture of longing and determination, of sadness and hope. He was offering her a chance to break the curse, to reclaim the warmth that had been lost, to find her place in a world she had never known existed. She took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs, a stark reminder of the choice she was about to make. She placed her hand in his. The contact was electric, sending a jolt of energy through her, a wave of warmth that spread through her veins, chasing away the lingering chill. It was a commitment, a promise, a leap of faith into the unknown. Beneath the frozen moon, their joined hands were the only point of warmth in a world rapidly succumbing to an eternal winter. Chapter 10. The Hunter's Pursuit. The moment their hands met, the ice beneath them groaned, a deep, resonant sound that echoed across the frozen lake. It wasn't a sound of breaking, but of shifting, of awakening. Rorik squeezed her hand gently, his touch reassuring, yet his eyes were alert, scanning the surrounding woods. "We must hurry," he said, his voice low and urgent. "The veil is thinning, but it will not stay open forever." He didn't wait for her to question him. He pulled her forward, towards the center of the lake, his pace quickening. Eowyn stumbled along beside him, her heart pounding, her mind racing. The ice felt strangely soft beneath her feet, not the solid, unyielding surface she expected. It was as if it were breathing alive. As they moved further out onto the lake, The moonlight seemed to intensify, bathing the ice in an ethereal glow. The air grew colder, yet Eowyn felt a strange warmth emanating from Rorik's hand, a protective shield against the biting chill. Suddenly, Rorik stopped, his body tensing. He raised his head, sniffing the air like a wild animal, his silver eyes narrowed, focused on a point in the distance, back towards the shore they had just left. "What is it?" Eowyn asked, her voice a nervous whisper. "Someone is coming," he said, his voice grim. "And they're not friendly." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "We must be quick. They are hunters. They hunt my kind. And they know about you." "Hunters?" The word sent a jolt of fear through Eowyn. "Hunters of Frostborn?" It sounded like something out of a nightmare, a twisted version of the stories her grandmother had told her. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice trembling. "They call themselves the Solstice Guard," Rorik said, his voice laced with a hint of disdain. "An ancient order, dedicated to eradicating the Frostborn, to maintaining the balance as they see it. They believe we are a threat, a danger to the human world." He squeezed her hand again, his touch reassuring.
"They will not harm you, Eowyn."
"I will not allow it." His words were meant to be comforting, but they only served to heighten her fear. She was caught in the middle of a conflict she didn't understand, a war between two ancient factions, a battle between the forces of winter and what? Fire? As if in answer to her unspoken question, a flicker of light appeared in the distance, back on the shore. It was a small, flickering flame, growing larger as it approached. And then she saw them. Figures, clad in dark clothing, carrying torches, moving swiftly across the frozen ground towards the lake. They were too far away to make out any details, but their intent was clear. They were hunting. And they were closing in. Rorik pulled her forward again, his pace even faster now. "Run, Eowyn," he urged, his voice a desperate whisper.
"Run."
She ran. She ran as fast as her old legs could carry her, stumbling over the uneven ice, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The fear was a cold, sharp knot in her stomach, propelling her forward, driving her to keep pace with Rorik's long strides. She could hear the hunters behind them, their shouts echoing across the frozen lake, their torches casting flickering shadows on the ice. They were gaining ground, their pursuit relentless. Rorik glanced back, his expression grim. He muttered something under his breath, words she couldn't understand, words that seemed to hum with power. The air around them grew even colder, the ice beneath their feet seeming to solidify, becoming smoother, easier to run on. He was using his magic, his power, to help them escape. But would it be enough? The hunters were closing in, their torches burning brighter, their shouts growing louder. Eowyn felt a surge of despair, a feeling that they were trapped, that there was no escape. The hunters were closing in, their fiery torches a stark contrast to the frozen world, and the promise of warmth they offered was laced with a deadly intent. Chapter 11. Scars of the Heart. The shouts of the hunters grew closer, the flickering light of their torches casting dancing shadows on the ice, making it difficult to see. Eowyn stumbled, her ankle twisting beneath her, sending a sharp jolt of pain up her leg. She cried out, falling to her knees, her hand slipping from Rorik's grasp. He turned back instantly, his silver eyes wide with alarm. He knelt beside her, his hand hovering over her injured ankle, his touch radiating a faint warmth. "Eowyn," he exclaimed, his voice laced with concern. "Are you all right?" She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes, a mixture of pain and fear. "I think I twisted it," she gasped. I can't run." The hunters were almost upon them, their torches burning brightly, their faces now visible in the flickering light. They were grim-faced, determined, their eyes fixed on Rorik, their weapons swords, axes, and what looked like crossbows loaded with silver-tipped bolts glinting menacingly in the moonlight. Rorik stood up, his body shielding Eowyn from the approaching hunters. He drew a long, slender blade from beneath his cloak, the steel shimmering with a faint, blue light. It was a beautiful weapon, elegant and deadly, a perfect reflection of its wielder. "Stay behind me," Yoan, he said, his voice low and commanding. I will not let them harm you. He faced the hunters, his stance firm, his expression resolute. He was outnumbered, outmatched, but he didn't flinch. He stood his ground, a lone wolf facing a pack of predators, ready to defend the woman he had sworn to protect. The leader of the hunters, a tall, muscular man with a cruel scar running across his face, stepped forward, his torch held high. Frostborn, he spat, his voice filled with hatred. Your reign of terror ends tonight. Rorik didn't respond, his silver eyes fixed on the hunter, his blade held steady. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackling of the torches and the ragged breathing of Eowyn, huddled on the ice behind him. The hunter with the scar raised his hand, signaling his men. They spread out, forming a semicircle around Rorik and Eowyn, their weapons poised, ready to strike. Surrender, Frostborn, the leader commanded, and perhaps we will spare the woman. Rorik's grip tightened on his blade, his knuckles turning white. He glanced back at Eowyn, his expression softening for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Then, he turned back to face the hunters, his face a mask of defiance. Never, he said, his voice a low growl. The hunter with the scar smiled, a cruel, chilling smile. Then you leave us no choice, he said. He lunged forward, his torch held high, his sword flashing in the moonlight. Rorik met his attack, his blade moving with lightning speed, deflecting the blow. The battle had begun. Eowyn watched in horror as Rorik fought, his movements graceful and deadly, his blade a blur of silver and blue. He was a skilled warrior, but he was outnumbered, surrounded by enemies who were determined to kill him. A stray arrow whizzed past her head, embedding itself in the ice just inches from her face. She cried out, scrambling back, her injured ankle throbbing with pain. She saw Rorik falter, a sword slicing across his arm, drawing a line of crimson blood. He staggered, but he didn't fall. He fought on, his determination unwavering, his eyes filled with a fierce, protective fire. It wasn't just his life on the line. She realized it was his purpose. And that purpose was now intrinsically linked to her. The scar across her palm pulsed, a throbbing echo of the wound Rorik had just sustained. Chapter 12. The Thawing Deception. The sight of Rorik's blood, stark red against the pristine white of the ice, ignited something within Eowyn. Fear, yes, but also anger. A fierce, protective rage she hadn't known she possessed. These men, these hunters, were trying to kill him, to kill the man who had shown her kindness, who had revealed her heritage, who had offered her a chance at something more. She couldn't just sit there and watch him die. She had to do something. She looked around, desperately searching for anything she could use as a weapon. Her eyes fell on a large, jagged piece of ice, broken off from the edge of the lake. It was heavy, unwieldy, but it was all she had. Ignoring the throbbing pain in her ankle, she crawled towards the ice shard, her hands scrabbling at the frozen surface. She grasped the ice, its sharp edges cutting into her palms, but she didn't care. She had to help Rorik. She struggled to her feet, her injured ankle screaming in protest, but she gritted her teeth, forcing herself to stand. She raised the ice shard above her head, her arms trembling with the effort. One of the hunters, distracted by Rorik's fierce defense, turned towards her, his eyes widening in surprise. He raised his crossbow, aiming at her, his finger tightening on the trigger. "No!" Eowyn screamed, her voice filled with a raw, primal power she hadn't known she possessed. She threw the ice shard with all her might. It flew through the air, a blur of white, striking the hunter in the chest with a sickening thud. He gasped, dropping his crossbow, clutching at his chest, his eyes wide with shock and pain. He stumbled backward, falling to the ice with a groan. Rorik, seeing his opportunity, used the distraction to his advantage. He disarmed another hunter with a swift, precise movement of his blade, then turned to face the leader, the man with the scar. The leader, enraged by Eowyn's intervention and the loss of 2 of his men, charged at Rorik, his sword raised high, his face contorted with fury. Rorik met his attack, their blades clashing in a shower of sparks. They fought fiercely, their movements a blur of steel and shadow, their breaths mingling in the frigid air. Eowyn watched, her heart pounding, her body trembling with adrenaline. She had to do something more. She had to help Rorik, but she didn't know how. She closed her eyes, focusing on the mark on her palm. The mark of the winter wolf, the symbol of her heritage, of her connection to Rorik, to the power of the Frostborn. She remembered the vision she had seen in the ice, the vision of Alara, commanding the snow and ice, wielding her power with grace and confidence. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on Rorik, on the battle raging before her. She felt a surge of energy, a tingling sensation that spread through her veins, a warmth that chased away the lingering chill. She didn't understand it. She didn't know how to control it, but she knew, instinctively, that she had to use it. She raised her hand, palm open, towards the remaining hunters.
Stop!
She cried, her voice echoing across the frozen lake, amplified by the power that now coursed through her. Leave him alone. The air around her shimmered, the ice beneath her feet seeming to vibrate. The hunters, momentarily stunned by her sudden display of something, hesitated, their weapons lowered. Even the scarred leader paused, his gaze flickering between Rorik and Eowyn, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. It was a deception, a fragile illusion of power born of desperation, but for a fleeting moment, it held. The ice, however, began to crack under the sudden, unnatural shift. Chapter 13. Blood on the Snow. The moment of hesitation, born from Eowyn's desperate cry and the unexpected shimmer of power, was all Rorik needed. He pressed his advantage, his movements swift and decisive. He disarmed the scarred leader with a sharp, precise strike, sending the man's sword skittering across the ice. The remaining hunters, seeing their leader disarmed and their comrades fallen, faltered. Their fear, momentarily suppressed by their zeal, resurfaced. They looked at each other, their eyes wide with uncertainty, their resolve crumbling. Rorik stood panting, his chest heaving, his blade dripping with blood, but his silver eyes were fixed on Eowyn, filled with a mixture of concern and something else.
Frida?
Amazement? The scarred leader, scrambling to his feet, glared at Rorik, his face contorted with hatred. This isn't over, Frostborn, he spat. We will be back. We will hunt you down. We will end your cursed lineage. He turned to his remaining men, his voice harsh and commanding. Retreat. We will regroup and return. The hunters, relieved to escape with their lives, scrambled to obey. They gathered their fallen comrades and their weapons and retreated across the ice, their torches casting flickering shadows on the frozen landscape. Rorik watched them go, his body tense, his blade still raised. Only when they were out of sight did he relax, lowering his weapon, his shoulders slumping with exhaustion. He turned to Eowyn, his silver eyes searching her face, his expression filled with concern. Are you all right? He asked, his voice rough with exhaustion and relief. She nodded, her body trembling, her legs threatening to give way beneath her. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her weak and shaky, the pain in her ankle a throbbing reminder of her injury. I think so, she stammered. But my ankle, he knelt beside her, his hand gently examining her injured ankle. His touch, despite the cold air, was surprisingly warm, sending a soothing sensation through her throbbing limb. It's not broken, he said, his voice softening, but it is badly sprained. You need to rest. He looked around, his gaze sweeping across the frozen lake, stained with blood, littered with discarded weapons and broken ice. It was a scene of chaos and violence, a stark reminder of the battle that had just taken place. We need to get you somewhere safe, he said, his voice grim. Somewhere warm. He stood up, his movements slow and deliberate, his body clearly aching from the fight. He sheathed his blade, the silver glinting in the moonlight. He looked at Eowyn, his silver eyes filled with a deep, unwavering determination. I will take you to my home, he said. To the realm of the Frostborn. It is the only place where you will be safe. The words, spoken with such certainty, sent a shiver down Eowyn's spine. The realm of the Frostborn. It was a place of legend, of myth, of the unknown. And yet, it was the only place where she could find refuge, where she could heal, where she could perhaps finally understand her destiny. He reached down and, before she could protest, scooped her up into his arms. She was surprised by his strength, by the ease with which he lifted her, despite his own injuries. He held her close, his body warm against hers, a comforting presence in the cold, desolate landscape. He began to walk, his steps slow but steady, across the blood-stained snow, towards the center of the lake, towards the gateway to another world. As he carried her, the faint, pulsing glow returned to the mark on her palm, a silent echo of the power that had surged through her, a power that was now, inextricably, linked to him, to the blood on the snow, to the destiny that awaited her. Chapter 14. The Ancient Pact. The center of the lake was different. The ice here wasn't just frozen water, it shimmered with an inner light, a swirling vortex of blues and whites, like a captured aurora borealis. It pulsed with a gentle rhythm, a heartbeat of magic, barely perceptible yet undeniably present. Rorik, carrying Eowyn effortlessly despite his injuries, stopped at the edge of this shimmering expanse. He looked down at her, his silver eyes filled with a mixture of tenderness and determination. "Hold on tight, Eowyn," he said, his voice a low murmur. "This may be disorienting." She nodded, her arms tightening around his neck, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She trusted him. Despite everything, despite the danger, despite the unknown, she trusted him. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, his body tensing. He murmured something in a language she didn't understand, words that seemed to hum with power, resonating with the pulsing energy of the ice. Then he stepped forward, into the shimmering vortex. Eowyn gasped, a sensation of falling, of swirling, of being enveloped in a kaleidoscope of light and color, overwhelming her senses. It was like nothing she had ever experienced before, a journey beyond the realm of the physical, a passage through the veil between worlds. The sensation lasted only a few moments, but it felt like an eternity. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Eowyn opened her eyes, blinking, disoriented. She was still in Rorik's arms, but the world around them had changed. Completely. Gone was the frozen lake, the snow-covered landscape, the dark, oppressive sky. They were standing in a cave, but it was unlike any cave she had ever seen. The walls were made of ice, but it wasn't the cold, brittle ice of the mortal world. It was shimmering, translucent, glowing with an inner light, illuminating the cavern with an ethereal, otherworldly glow. Crystals, large and small, jutted out from the walls and ceiling, refracting the light, creating a dazzling display of colors. The air was cold, yes, but it wasn't the biting, bone-chilling cold of the frozen lake. It was a refreshing cold, invigorating, filled with a sense of magic. Rorik gently set her down on a bed of soft furs, his hands lingering on her arms for a moment, his touch reassuring. "Welcome, Eowyn Aldrich," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavern, "to the Frostborn realm. To my home." She looked around, her eyes wide with wonder and disbelief. It was beautiful, breathtakingly, impossibly beautiful. It was a world of ice and magic, a world that defied the laws of nature, a world that existed beyond the realm of human comprehension. "It's incredible," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Rorik smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, transforming his face from something stern and intimidating to something almost gentle. "It is," he agreed. "But it is also fragile. The balance is precarious, easily disrupted." He gestured towards a large, intricately carved ice sculpture in the center of the cavern. It depicted a man and a woman, their hands intertwined, their faces turned towards each other, their expressions filled with love and devotion. "That," he said, his voice taking on a reverent tone, "is a representation of the ancient pact. Of Alara and my ancestor, Theron. of the union that bound our two worlds together. He walked towards the sculpture, his hand tracing the outline of the figures, his touch gentle and respectful. They swore an oath, he continued, his voice a low murmur. An oath of love, of loyalty, of mutual respect. An oath to maintain the balance between the human world and the realm of the Frostborn. An oath that was broken by your ancestors. He turned back to face her, his expression grave. The breaking of that oath brought a curse, he said. A curse that has haunted your bloodline for centuries. A curse that only you, Eowyn, can break. He paused, his gaze intense, unwavering. The oath was more than words, Eowyn. It was a merging of souls, a joining of two beings into one purpose. That is the power and the responsibility you now inherit. The ice around them seemed to hum in response, a low, resonant vibration that echoed his words. Chapter 15. A cage of ice and lies. His words, heavy with the weight of centuries, settled upon Eowyn like a shroud of ice. A merging of souls. The concept was both terrifying and strangely alluring. It spoke of a connection deeper than anything she had ever known, a bond that transcended the physical, that reached into the very essence of her being.
But how?
She asked, her voice a trembling whisper. How can I merge my soul with yours? I don't even understand what that means. Rorik moved closer, his presence filling her vision, his silver eyes searching her face, his expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. It is not a simple process, Eowyn, he said, his voice low and gentle. It requires trust. It requires vulnerability. It requires a willingness to surrender. Surrender. The word sent a shiver down her spine. It was a word that held a double meaning, a word that spoke of both liberation and captivity. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers surprisingly warm against her skin, despite the icy aura that surrounded him. The touch was fleeting, barely a brush of skin against skin, yet it sent a jolt through her, a wave of warmth that spread through her veins, chasing away the lingering chill. The pact is not a prison, Eowyn, he said, his voice soft, reassuring. It is a partnership. A joining of two strengths, two powers, two souls, to create something greater. He paused, his gaze intense, unwavering. But it is also a responsibility. A duty to maintain the balance, to protect both our worlds from harm. He gestured around the cavern, at the shimmering ice walls, at the intricate crystals, at the ethereal beauty of the Frostborn realm. This world, he said, is dying, Eowyn. The breaking of the pact has weakened it, has drained its life force. The curse is a slow poison, a gradual decay that will eventually consume everything. His words painted a bleak picture, a picture of a dying world, a world that needed her, that depended on her, to survive. And my world? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. What will happen to my world? Rorik's expression darkened. The same fate awaits, he said grimly. The unnatural cold, the encroaching winter, it is a sign of the imbalance, a symptom of the curse. If the pact is not restored, the frost will spread, consuming your world, turning it into a frozen wasteland. The image of Oakhaven, of her home, of the world she knew, encased in ice, sent a chill down her spine, a cold, hard knot of fear tightening in her stomach. There has to be another way, she said, her voice laced with desperation. There has to be a way to break the curse without this. Rorik shook his head, his expression filled with a profound sadness. There is no other way, Eowyn, he said quietly. The pact is the only way. It is our destiny. It is our fate. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, his silver eyes burning with an intensity that both frightened and fascinated her. Do not be afraid, Eowyn, he said, his voice a soft, seductive whisper. I will be with you. I will guide you. I will protect you. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. The contact was electric, sending a jolt of energy through her, a wave of warmth that spread through her veins, chasing away the lingering chill. But beneath the warmth, beneath the reassurance, beneath the undeniable pull she felt towards him, a seed of doubt began to grow. A nagging feeling that something wasn't right, that something was missing. The beauty of this place, the warmth of his touch, the urgency in his voice, it felt like a meticulously crafted cage, a prison of ice and lies, designed to trap her, to force her into a destiny she wasn't sure she wanted. The shimmering walls seemed to close in a beautiful, yet suffocating, embrace. Chapter 16. The Fire Within. That seed of doubt, once planted, began to sprout, tendrils of unease wrapping around her heart. Ioan looked at Rorik, really looked at him, past the captivating silver eyes, past the aura of power and ancient sorrow, past the undeniable pull she felt towards him. She saw the desperation in his gaze, the subtle tension in his jaw, the almost pleading quality in his voice. He said it was a partnership, a joining of equals, but his words, his actions, spoke of something else. Of need. Of a desperate attempt to save his world, regardless of the cost to her. She gently, but firmly, withdrew her hand from his. The sudden loss of contact seemed to startle him, a flicker of surprise crossing his face, quickly masked by his usual stoic expression. "Rorik," she said, her voice stronger now, fueled by a rising tide of defiance. "Tell me everything. Tell me the whole truth. Not just the parts that suit your purpose." He hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers, his body tensing slightly. It was a subtle tell, but it was enough. He was hiding something. "I have told you the truth, Ioan," he said, his voice a low murmur, but it lacked the conviction of his earlier pronouncements. "No," she countered, her voice unwavering. "You've told me a truth. Your truth. But there's more, isn't there? Something about the pact, about Alara, about me, that you're not telling me." He sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly, his facade of control cracking. He looked at her, his silver eyes filled with a mixture of resignation and perhaps a flicker of respect. "Very well, Ioan," he said quietly. "You are perceptive. More so than I anticipated." He turned away from her, walking towards the ice sculpture of Alara and Theron, his hand tracing the outline of the figures, his touch no longer gentle, but almost desperate. "The pact," he said, his voice taking on a faraway quality, "was not just about balance. It was about power. Alara was not just the Winter's bride. She was a conduit, a source of immense magical energy, energy that the Frostborn craved." He paused, his voice choked with emotion. "My ancestor, Theron, he loved Alara, yes. But he also used her. He drew upon her power, strengthening his own, strengthening the Frostborn realm at the expense of her own vitality." The words hit Ioan like a physical blow. It was a betrayal that echoed across the centuries, a betrayal that resonated with her own growing sense of unease. "So the curse," she said, her voice trembling, "it wasn't just about the broken promise. It was about the imbalance of power, the draining of life force." Rorik nodded, his expression grim. "Yes," he said. "Alara's descendants, they inherited her power, but also her weakness. The curse is a slow drain, a gradual weakening of the life force, a legacy of Theron's greed." He turned back to face her, his silver eyes filled with a profound sadness, a sadness that finally rang true. "I did not want to burden you with this truth, Ioan," he said. "I wanted you to choose freely, to embrace your destiny without fear, without resentment. But you knew," she said, her voice laced with accusation, "you knew that by binding myself to you, by fulfilling the pact, I would be sacrificing myself. Just like Alara." He didn't deny it. He simply looked at her, his silence a confirmation of her worst fears. But within that fear, within that betrayal, something else ignited. A spark of anger, of defiance, of fire. A fire that burned away the lingering chill, a fire that warmed her from the inside out, a fire that whispered of a power she had only just begun to understand. It was the fire of her own will, her own spirit, a fire that refused to be extinguished, a fire that would not be sacrificed. The ice around them, for the first time since she arrived, seemed to recede, the shimmering walls losing some of their luster, their suffocating embrace weakening. Chapter 17. Shattered Reflections. The air in the cavern, once invigoratingly cold, now felt stifling, heavy with the weight of Rorik's unspoken admission and Eowyn's burgeoning anger. The shimmering ice walls, previously a source of wonder, now seemed like the bars of a gilded cage, reflecting her own fractured emotions. "So, all this," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt, gesturing around the cavern. "The beauty, the magic, the talk of destiny, it was all a lie. A carefully constructed deception to lure me into a trap." Rorik flinched, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "Not a lie, Eowyn," he protested, his voice low and strained. "A necessary omission. I did not want to frighten you. I wanted you to see the good, the potential, the hope for whom?" "Rorik?" she challenged, her voice rising. "Hope for your people? Hope for your dying realm? What about my hope? What about my life?" He looked at her, his silver eyes filled with a deep, unsettling mixture of desperation and regret. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was trapped, caught in the web of his own deception, his carefully constructed facade shattered by her unwavering gaze. Eowyn turned away from him, walking towards the ice sculpture of Alara and Theron. She looked at the figures, their faces frozen in an eternal embrace, their hands intertwined in a symbol of a love that had turned sour, a love that had become a curse. She reached out and touched the ice, her fingers tracing the outline of Alara's face. She felt a surge of something. Not the tingling energy she had felt before, but a different kind of power. A connection. A kinship. A shared sense of betrayal. "She was used," Eowyn said, her voice quiet but firm, her gaze fixed on the ice sculpture. "Just like you intended to use me." Rorik didn't respond. He simply stood there, his shoulders slumped, his head bowed, his silence a tacit admission of her accusation. Eowyn closed her eyes, focusing on the connection she felt with Alara, on the fire that burned within her, on the power that was now stirring, awakening, demanding to be recognized. She remembered the vision she had seen in the lake, the vision of Alara commanding the snow and ice, wielding her power with grace and confidence. She remembered the surge of energy she had felt during the battle with the hunters, the unexpected display of power that had momentarily stunned them. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on Rorik, her expression resolute. "I am not Alara," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound strength. "I will not be used. I will not be sacrificed. I will find my own way. I will break the curse, but on my terms, not yours." The air in the cavern shimmered, the ice walls seeming to vibrate, responding to the power that now coursed through her. The crystals, once reflecting a dazzling array of colors, now seemed to dim, their light fading, as if drawing energy from her instead. Rorik looked at her, his silver eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and fear. He had underestimated her. He had underestimated her strength, her will, her fire. "Eowyn," he began, his voice a hesitant whisper, but she cut him off. "No," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "I will not be a pawn in your game. I will not be a sacrifice for your dying world. I will forge my own destiny." She turned away from him, walking towards the shimmering entrance of the cavern, the gateway that had brought her to this realm, the gateway that she now intended to use to escape. The reflection in the ice was no longer that of a frightened old woman, but of a figure radiating power, a figure wreathed in a faint, inner fire, a fire that was hers and hers alone. The ice, in response, seemed to crack slightly, a spiderweb of fissures spreading across its surface. Chapter 18. The Call of the Wild. As Eowyn approached the shimmering gateway, Rorik finally found his voice, a desperate plea escaping his lips. "Eowyn, wait. You don't understand. You cannot leave. The curse, it will consume you. It will consume both our worlds." She paused, her back to him, her hand hovering over the shimmering surface of the ice, the gateway back to her world. Back to what? A world slowly freezing. A world doomed by the broken pact. A world where she was a target, hunted by the Solstice Guard. She turned to face him, her expression resolute, her eyes burning with the fire of her own will, a fire that mirrored, yet defied, the icy power of the Frostborn. "I understand more than you think, Rorik," she said, her voice calm and clear, devoid of the fear and uncertainty that had plagued her before. "I understand that the curse is not just about a broken promise. It's about power, about control, about choice. And I choose to break free." "But how?" he asked, his voice a mixture of desperation and disbelief. "The pact is the only way. It has always been the only way. There is always another way," she countered, her voice firm and unwavering. "Alara may have been trapped, but I will not be. I will find my own path. I will forge my own destiny." She turned back to the gateway, her hand pressing against the shimmering surface. The ice felt different now. Not cold, not resistant, but almost welcoming. "You cannot control me, Rorik," she said, her voice echoing in the cavern. "You cannot control my power. You cannot control my heart." As she spoke the last word, she felt a surge of energy, a powerful wave that emanated from within her, spreading outwards, filling the cavern, shaking the very foundations of the Frostborn realm. The ice walls cracked, the crystals shattered, the ethereal beauty of the cavern crumbling around them. Rorik cried out, shielding his eyes from the sudden burst of light and power. Eowyn closed her eyes, embracing the energy, feeling it flow through her, transforming her, empowering her. She was no longer just an old woman, a widow, a victim of a centuries-old curse. She was something more, something powerful. She felt a connection, not to Rorik, not to the Frostborn, but to something else. Something wilder, something older, something free. She felt a connection to the earth, to the wind, to the very essence of winter itself, but a winter untainted by the curse, a winter of pure, untamed power. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the gateway, now swirling with an even more intense light, a vortex of energy beckoning her to return, to reclaim her world, to forge her own path. She stepped forward, into the shimmering light, leaving Rorik behind, leaving the crumbling Frostborn realm behind, leaving the lies and the deceptions and the broken promises behind. She stepped into the unknown, into the wild, into the power that was now hers, and hers alone. The call of the wild, a primal force, resonated within her, a promise of freedom, a promise of a future she would forge herself. The last thing she saw before the light consumed her was Rorik's face, a mixture of shock, fear, and a profound, heartbreaking sadness. Chapter 19. The Convergence of Fates. The return journey was different. There was no disorientation, no swirling vortex of light and color. It was instantaneous, a seamless transition from the ethereal beauty of the Frostborn realm to the stark reality of the frozen lake. Eowyn stood on the ice, the wind whipping around her, the snow stinging her face, but she didn't feel the cold. The fire within her, the wild, untamed power she had discovered, burned bright, warming her from the inside out. She looked around, her senses heightened, her perception sharpened. The lake, once a symbol of fear and uncertainty, now felt familiar, welcoming, a part of her, a reflection of her own inner landscape. She wasn't alone. Across the ice, figures were approaching. The Solstice Guard, the hunters, the scarred leader, his face contorted with rage, his sword raised, leading the charge. They had returned, as they had promised, to finish what they had started. But Eowyn was no longer the frightened old woman they had hunted before. She was something more, something powerful. She stood her ground, her feet firmly planted on the ice, her body radiating a subtle warmth that melted the snow around her, creating a small circle of clear ground. She raised her hand, palm open, towards the approaching hunters, a gesture not of defiance, but of invitation. "I am not your enemy," she said, her voice echoing across the frozen lake, amplified by the power that now coursed through her. "But I will not be hunted. I will not be controlled. I will not be a victim." The hunters hesitated, momentarily stunned by her transformation, by the power that emanated from her, by the aura of something wild, something untamed, that surrounded her. The scarred leader, however, did not falter. He charged forward, his sword flashing in the moonlight, his face filled with hatred and determination. "You are a threat, Frostborn," he spat, his voice laced with venom. "You must be eliminated." Yoan didn't flinch. She didn't raise her hand to defend herself. She simply waited. As the leader reached her, his sword raised to strike, she closed her eyes, focusing on the fire within her, on the connection she felt to the earth, to the wind, to the wild, untamed power of winter itself. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the approaching blade. And then she shifted. Not physically, not in the way Rorik had shifted, transforming into a being of ice and shadow. But internally, she embraced the wildness, the freedom, the power that was now hers. The leader's sword struck, but it didn't meet flesh. It met air. Yoan was gone. Not vanished, not disappeared, but transformed. She was the wind, the snow, the ice, the very essence of winter itself. She was everywhere and nowhere, a force of nature, untamed and unstoppable. The hunters cried out in fear and confusion, their weapons useless against a foe they could not see, could not touch, could not comprehend. The wind howled, the snow swirled, the ice cracked, the very elements rising up to defend her, to protect her, to embrace her as one of their own. And then, amidst the chaos, amidst the storm, another figure appeared. Rorik. He stood on the ice, his silver eyes searching the swirling snow, his expression a mixture of fear and hope. He had followed her. He had come back. Not to capture her, not to control her, but perhaps to help her. He raised his hand, his palm open, a gesture of surrender.
"Yoan,"
he cried, his voice barely audible above the howling wind.
"I understand now.
I was wrong. I will help you. We can break the curse together.
But not this way.
Not through force, not through control, but through understanding. Through balance." His words, carried on the wind, reached Yoan, wherever she was, whatever she had become. The storm, for a moment, seemed to pause. The wind, for a breath, held still. Two fates, two powers, converged on the frozen lake, the future uncertain, the balance hanging precariously in the swirling snow. Chapter 20. The Frostborns' Embrace. The wind stilled. The swirling snow settled. And Yoan reappeared. She stood on the ice, facing Rorik, her form shimmering slightly, as if the essence of winter still clung to her, a visible manifestation of the power she now wielded. She was no longer the frightened old woman, nor was she entirely the wild, untamed force of nature she had briefly become. She was something in between, something balanced. She looked at Rorik, her eyes, no longer a soft gray, but flecked with silver, reflecting the moonlight, reflecting the power of the winter, reflecting his own gaze. He took a step towards her, his hand still outstretched, his expression a mixture of hope and trepidation. "Oh," and he said, his voice soft, hesitant. "Can you hear me?" She nodded, her voice a whisper, yet it carried across the ice, clear and resonant. "I hear you, Rorik." The remaining hunters, huddled together, watched in fear and confusion, their weapons lowered, their faces pale in the moonlight. They were forgotten, irrelevant, caught in a conflict that transcended their understanding, a battle between two forces far greater than their own. Rorik took another step closer, closing the distance between them. "I was wrong," he said, his voice filled with a profound sadness, a deep regret. "I tried to control you, to force you into a destiny you did not choose. I was blinded by my own fear, by my own desperation to save my world." He paused, his gaze searching her face, his silver eyes pleading for understanding, for forgiveness. "I understand now," he continued. "The pact, it was never meant to be about control. It was about balance, about partnership, about love." The word hung in the air, heavy with implication, resonating with the silent power that now flowed between them, a power that was no longer his, no longer hers, but theirs. Eowyn looked at him, her expression softening, the fire within her dimming slightly, replaced by a warmth, a tenderness, a connection. She saw the truth in his eyes, the sincerity in his voice, the genuine remorse that emanated from him. She reached out and took his hand. The contact was electric, sending a jolt of energy through both of them, a merging of power, a joining of souls, not forced, not coerced, but freely given. The ice beneath their feet shimmered, the frozen lake responding to their union, to the restoration of balance, to the forging of a new pact, a pact based not on control, but on love, on trust, on understanding. The curse, Eowyn said, her voice stronger now, filled with a newfound confidence, it can be broken. But not by fulfilling the old pact. By creating a new one. Rorik nodded, his grip tightening on her hand, his silver eyes shining with hope. Together, he said, his voice filled with a quiet strength. We will forge a new path. We will restore the balance. We will heal both our worlds. The scarred leader of the hunters, seeing his opportunity, raised his sword, a desperate cry escaping his lips.
No,
he shouted. You cannot. They are evil. They must be destroyed. But his cry was cut short. A wave of ice, not cold, not destructive, but protective, rose from the lake, engulfing the hunters, freezing them in place, not harming them, but containing them. It was not Rorik's power, nor was it entirely Eowyn's. It was theirs. A combined force, a balanced energy, a manifestation of their new pact, a pact that protected, not destroyed, a pact that healed, not harmed. As one they turned to look out upon the lake. The embrace of the Frostborn and the descendant of the Winter's Bride was no longer a forced marriage, but the fusion of equals. The frost that had gripped the land showed the first, subtle signs of receding, a promise of spring in the heart of an unnatural winter. Epilogue. The years that followed were a testament to the new pact, a testament to the power of love, trust, and understanding. The unnatural winter receded, slowly but surely, replaced by the gentle warmth of spring, the vibrant colors of summer, the golden hues of autumn. Oakhaven, once gripped by fear and frost, blossomed anew, its inhabitants thriving, their lives touched by a subtle magic, a gentle reminder of the balance that had been restored. Eowyn and Rorik, their lives intertwined, their souls merged, became the guardians of that balance, the protectors of both worlds. They walked between the realms, bridging the gap between the human and the Frostborn, fostering understanding, cooperation, and mutual respect. The Solstice Guard, initially resistant, eventually came to understand the new reality, their hatred and fear replaced by a cautious acceptance, their mission redefined, their purpose transformed. They became the guardians of the boundary, ensuring that the balance was maintained, that neither world encroached upon the other, that the mistakes of the past were never repeated. Eowyn, no longer just an old woman, but a being of power and grace, found a purpose she had never imagined, a love she had never expected, a life that was both challenging and fulfilling. She embraced her heritage, her power, her connection to the wild, untamed essence of winter, but she also retained her humanity, her compassion, her warmth. Rorik, freed from the burden of his ancestors' mistakes, learned the true meaning of partnership, of love, of sacrifice. He embraced the change, the balance, the new pact that had been forged, not through force, but through understanding, through forgiveness, through her. They often walked the shores of Oakhaven Lake, hand in hand, their silver eyes reflecting the moonlight, their intertwined fingers a symbol of their enduring bond. The lake, once a source of fear and uncertainty, now shimmered with a gentle magic, a testament to the new pact, a reflection of the love that had bloomed in the heart of winter. They built a home, not in the Frostborn realm, nor entirely in the human world, but in between. A place where the ice met the earth, where the winter merged with the spring, where two souls, once divided by destiny, now found solace and strength in each other. The home was simple, filled with light, laughter, and the scent of rosemary and thyme, a constant reminder of the life Eowyn had once known and the life she had chosen to build, together with him. The frost no longer followed Eowyn. It danced with her, a partner in a waltz of seasons, a testament to the enduring power of love and the transformative magic of a second chance. And sometimes, when the moon was full and the lake was still, you could almost hear the whisper of their names, carried on the wind, a legend reborn, a love story for the ages.